Hi everyone, my name is David. This is the Spanish pronunciation of the name David, and I work as an editor for Babbel in Berlin. Uh, Actually come from Colombia, and I'm streaming here from Bogota, from Colombia's capital. And I'm here with my colleague and friend, David from the US.
Hey everyone, I'm David and I work as a content producer in the New York office of Babbel. So I'm actually broadcasting from Tennessee right now, where my parents live, where I grew up. So I'm so excited to be here speaking with you all, giving you some tips about Spanish learning, some anecdotes about the Spanish language, especially to be doing it with my friend and colleague David, who is so smart and so wonderful. I'm sure you'll really enjoy hearing from him.
That's such a nice opportunity for us also to help people just learn some Spanish through these very difficult times. And I'm glad to be here with you, David. And I think we picked a very good topic to start offering these sessions. We will be talking about the main differences between two very different languages like Spanish and English. And we will be touching upon certain questions that are popping up since the beginning when learning Spanish. So maybe you can say something about that, David?
Of course. So, David, you are a native speaker of Spanish. You're from Colombia and you've been speaking Spanish since birth, but I've just learned it in school over the past couple of years. And of course, I've been practicing with Babbel. And so I'm very familiar with it, but the process of learning Spanish as a native English speaker is a lot different from just speaking it natively. And I'm sure that you notice a lot of differences too as a native Spanish speaker learning English. So we hope that this presentation can be helpful for people who come from both sides of the spectrum, but specifically people who speak English natively and are learning Spanish. I'll try to share some tips that were helpful for me, ways that I think about Spanish language learning, but we'll also talk about what it's like to learn a language like Spanish in general and how it involves kind of taking what you know about your native language, in this case, English, and reframing your perspective a little bit to understand language in a new light and be able to use Spanish creatively and expressively without directly needing to translate back to English. Because once you start learning new languages, you realize that language learning isn't all about just translating one word for one word. It's about getting your point across and communicating what you need to say. And so Spanish lets you do that in some really fun, creative ways. And we'll talk about some of those.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. And that's why we've chosen three topics we are going to talk about today. The first being the four ways to address people in Spanish. So I am sure many Spanish learners have already have contact with them, and they recognize how difficult it is to know when to use what. And these also affect the way we conjugate verbs. So we express actions. So this is going to be our second topic, and we will close this first session with some fixed expressions that we use in Spanish, which are not easy to translate into English. So we'll see that the best way to learn them is just understanding that they work differently in English and in Spanish. And I'm sure that this is going to be useful for you. But what if we start with the first topic, which is how we address people in Spanish. So this is one of the main challenges that English speakers have when they are learning Spanish. And so we will start with the first example, which is how to address people when we are talking only to one person. So when we are talking to one person, we have these two words which are very special. We have tú, which we are going to use in informal context situations when talking to our parents, to our friends, to our siblings. And on the other hand, we have usted, which is used for formal contexts. Both words have also different regional differences. So, for example, when I'm here interacting with my parents, with my family in general, we use usted. whereas it's more common to use to in most of the countries widely among across the world. So this is when talking only to one person, when addressing one person. We are going to use to and usted in formal context. But what happens if we address a group of people? So we are going to see that there are also two words, which are vosotros or vosotras and ustedes. Uh, how do we know what word we should use? It's very simple. Vosotros and vosotras are words that we use also in informal context, as it happens also with tú. So vosotros is basically the plural form of tú, and ustedes is going to be used in formal situations. However, there is a big regional difference between Spain and Latin America, which is related to the use of ustedes. Vosotros and vosotras are not used in Latin America at all, so we always use ustedes both in informal and formal contexts when addressing many people. So I think it's we have here 4 different words which mean you in English. But if we recognize the context and we know that we are either in a formal or informal situation, then we are sure what word we can use.
That was a very good explanation, David, and I couldn't have said it better myself. I want to point out how that touches on the point that I was making earlier, which is that when you learn Spanish, you kind of have to be willing to see language in a new way. Because as an English speaker, I have one word for you, and that's the word you, whether I'm talking to one person or a group of people. I mean, I come from the south of the United States, so we have the word y'all, which encompasses a group of people, which is kind of like ustedes, but there's no strict definition for when you have to use it or the word you. So learning when to use usted or tú in formal or informal context is something that you just have to have practice with. And it involves getting out and talking to native speakers and learning the context in which you would use the more formal usted or the informal tú. And then also understanding the regional differences that a speaker in Spain would say vosotros o vosotras to a group of informal, more than one person, but ustedes for formal pluralities of people. So it just involves having practice and being willing to make mistakes and talk with people and figure out the context in which you would use the informal or the formal too.
Yeah, exactly. So knowing this, we kind of are sure that the verb conjugation also gets a bit more complicated, which is why we are going to talk a little bit also about this conjugation topic. But let's start with the definition of verb. What is a verb? Verb is basically any action that we do. So in English, we recognize verbs when we place the word to. So we say to eat, to learn, to watch, and all of these verbs, which end in Spanish in ar, er, or ir. So those verbs are conjugated in Spanish, which means that we adapt the verb, the form, and we add certain endings depending the person we are using as a subject. So, for instance, we have the verb. Let's start with the verb to eat, comer. So we have the verb, as you can see, and what happens if we want to say I eat? So we're going to take the verb and we drop the ending er and we add a special ending for the personal pronoun yo, which means I. So as you can see, since verb forms change in Spanish, we don't need the personal pronoun, which is in this case yo. So we drop it. We leave it out, and we only say como, because we have the ending that says I'm talking about myself, who is doing the action, eating. So this is also a special difference that pops up very, very often in Spanish. So we tend to leave out the personal pronouns, the words, and we always use the verb. This doesn't mean that we kind of ignore the personal pronoun every time. So it is also possible to say yo como when I want to stress that it's me and not anyone else, not any other person.
That's right.
Any thoughts about that, David?
And so when you're speaking English, you can't just ignore the subject pronoun. So if I were to say, so let's talk about the verb to eat. If I just said eat or eats, it's not really clear who I'm talking about. So I could say I eat, you eat, we eat, but you need to have that subject pronoun in that place. But where Spanish lets you get more creative and have a little bit more flexibility is just as David was saying, that you are allowed to drop the object pronoun because you have what are called conjugations, which are the verb endings that correspond to the subject itself. So como for I eat. You can also say yo como, as David was saying, if you want to be more specific, like yo como manzanas, I eat apples, y tú comes naranjas, oranges. But you don't need it because it's not necessary. So that's just one other example of how Spanish requires you to kind of reframe your thinking around how language works. If you speak English, you are required to have, and you'll always put in that subject pronoun, we, they, you, whatever. But Spanish lets you have some more flexibility, like I was saying.
Mm-hmm. And it's always depending on the context. Spanish is a language where we need a lot of context, whereas English tends to be more specific, tends to share any details on the context directly in the language. Yeah, so we have also more verbs, like for example, to live, which is in Spanish, vivir. So how do we conjugate the verb vivir in Spanish? If I want to say you live in the United States, I'm going to say tú vives en los Estados Unidos. So as we can see, in Spanish, we can drop the personal pronoun tú, and we can just say vives en los Estados Unidos, as we see there in the example. So far we've seen 4 different words for you and how the verb conjugation, those verb endings, allow us in Spanish to leave out the personal pronoun, this little word that refers to a person or to an object. What if we jump to the last topic that we prepared for you today, which is those fixed expressions that we use in Spanish that are not easy to translate into English. But I guess, David, you have more examples on that since you learned Spanish as a foreign language.
Mm-hmm. So one of my favorite examples of an expression that's unique to Spanish that doesn't really directly correlate to English words if you try to translate one word for another is how to say I like something or I love something. So there's this really, really handy Spanish phrase, me gusta or me gustan, depending on the context of what you're talking about, that lets you express I like this, but it's not a direct translation, I like X. It's more like you're coming up with a more creative and particular way to say it in Spanish. That kind of, if you had to translate it, would kind of roughly translate to something pleases me, or this is pleasing to me, or it pleases me to do something. So if you take the construction me gusta, the me represents to me, the gusta is the verb meaning to please, and then you get to add some sort of object or verb at the end of it to say, I like to do this, or I like that. So for example, we say, me gusta aprender español. I like to learn Spanish. Me gusta nadar, as you can see on the screen. I like to swim. So that's a construction in Spanish that you can't, like I was saying, you can't really translate back to English one word for one word, but it's so helpful to have because, of course, when you're speaking a language, you want to be able to talk about what you do and don't like. And this is one of the perfect ways to do it. So that's an example of one of my favorite Spanish expressions that you kind of just have to get practice with and use in context. And even if it seems tricky at first, once you have conversations with native speakers or you use Babbel to practice your Spanish, you'll get more familiar with the construction and it'll become more second nature to you just because that's how Spanish speakers express the things they like and don't like.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It would be also very strange to translate this word by word into English because it would be literally to me pleases swimming or to swim, or to me pleases learning Spanish. When do we use me gusta or me gustan? It depends on how many things I like. So if I like many things, I will use me gustan um, tantas cosas, so many things. And if I'm using a verb like in the example I like to swim, then it's gonna be me gusta without the n at the end.
And
Um,
there are a couple other examples of verbs that work like this, including encantar. So me encanta means me encanta whatever means I love whatever, or
mhm.
this isn't whatever is enchanting to me. Or same thing with me interesa X, like X is interesting to me. So a lot of verbs end up working that way, but you can't really try to map them back to English because that's not how English works either. So it's like I was saying, just a matter of practicing and getting used to the way that these expressions work.
Mhm. Exactly. And we have also another expression that we use also very often in Spanish, which is the construction hay que. So hay que is something that we cannot directly translate into English because every time when we are expressing this hay que into English, we would say we have to. Like in the example, we have to practice every day Spanish, for example. Hay que practicar español todos los días. And we have this very impersonal expression in Spanish. This is also a sign that Spanish is a bit more impersonal in some situations where it is possible to say in English, for example, we have to, or you have to specify the person. You have to practice every day. But what about those sentences when we are talking about the weather? It's raining. So it's raining. If we put also the example, would be está lloviendo. So as we can see, there is no clear subject in Spanish. We leaves lots of empty space there to say to understand what the subject is, or if there is no subject at all. So what's causing the raining? No idea. But that's how Spanish works. So coming back to our example where we have hay que practicar todos los días, there we see how different both languages can be. And in such cases, it's better just to learn the phrase, how it works, and tip from our side is try to learn always these kind of expressions with a sample sentence that can apply to you. For example, if you like something a lot, try to say that in Spanish with me gusta or me gustan, and you are gonna get the hang out of it.
Very good explanation. I like that you said that Spanish was more of an impersonal language because that's something that I picked up on a lot as I was learning. It's my need to insert a subject at the beginning of a sentence because that's what English does, but realizing that there are a lot of more creative ways to express something in Spanish rather than trying to force a subject into a position where it might not exist, or where a native speaker might hear me use one and say, hey, that actually doesn't sound right. And I'll mention one more brief example before we wrap up, but the pronoun it. So if you want to say, like you were just mentioning, it is raining, it is sunny outside. There's not really a direct way to capture the concept of it when it is the subject of a sentence in Spanish. Instead, you just drop it completely and use the conjugated verb to
Mhm.
start está lloviendo or whatever you want to say. So that's something that as an English speaker, you'll have to get used to when you start speaking Spanish, is like these expressions like hay que or está lloviendo, where there is no subject doing the action. It's kind of just like you use the context to figure out what is happening. And it sounds more natural to actually leave off the subject to begin with.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's a very nice explanation, David. I think we are ready with the topics that we brought to you. And if you agree, we can also have a look at some comments on some questions that our viewers are posting here so that we can, yeah, select some of them and try to find an answer.
I think that's a great plan.
So I see, for example, here, Michelle is asking about when to use le, la, or lo when using the usted form with the reflexive verbs. And we can just Was it here? Shortly. This is a good question. Since we were talking about things that I like to do, we were using me gusta or me gustan. But what if we say he likes or she likes doing something? She likes chocolate. In this case, we are using a verb like gustar, which literally means to please. So when we translate this into English, it would be to her, to him, pleases something. In this case, in Spanish, we are going to use the same word, le. Le for usted, le for él, and le for ella. So this is the advantage of learning Spanish in this case, where we have the same word for the three different cases. So in the case of usted, either if it's a woman or a man, we are going to use le gusta el chocolate. It can be he likes chocolate, she likes chocolate, or you, uh, woman, likes like chocolate, or you, man, like chocolate, for example.
That's a great explanation. And that's something that I struggled with, was the concept of conjugations to begin with, like he, she, and usted, the formal you in Spanish, all take the same verb endings, but you would think that usted, because it means you, would take the same ending as the informal you, and that's just not how it works. And that's something that, as an English speaker, I had a hard time grasping when I was first learning Spanish, but there are specific rules about how the language works that you just have to use in practice and get to know. So I think that was a great question to highlight some of the differences between Spanish and English.
And just a little comment on this: if you say you like to swim in the informal context, if I'm talking to a friend, it wouldn't be le gusta or le gustaría. In this case, le gustaría, it means something like you would like. In that case, if I'm in an informal context, it would be te gusta. ¿Sí? Te gusta el chocolate.
I see a follow-up question that fits in exactly with this topic from Leah, and she asks, so you don't conjugate the verb with me gusta? And that's correct. You actually, if you're going to say, I like to do something, or he, she, we like to do something, you keep the verb in, it's called the infinitive form, which means that it's not conjugated. It's kind of like, you could think of it as the purest form of the verb when it's not the one that you're going to do the operation on, to cut off the ending, to when you add a pronoun at the beginning, or you change the verb tense, whatever you're going to do to it. So this is kind of like the purest form of the verb. So like we said earlier, if you wanted to say, I like to swim, me gusta nadar, then you would keep the verb nadar, which means to swim, in its infinitive form. Or me gusta comer, I like to eat. Me gusta aprender, I like to learn. So that's a good rule to remember, is that you would keep the verb in its infinitive form when you use expressions like me gusta or me encanta, I love, or me fascina, I'm fascinated by.
In this case, gusta changes also depending on how many things you like. That's something that I said before. So it can be that I like, I don't know, red flowers. So in that case, the verb gusta changes from gusta to gustan with n at the end. So, but this is a little variation. This is a very special verb that works in an inverted way in Spanish. So things that you like in Spanish please you in our case. That's why it would just say red flowers please you or please me. Yeah. In that case, me gustan las flores rojas.
That was a great point to add. Thank you for following up with that. I almost forgot. And then I see also Sunita has a question where she says, I means there is. I think this is a great way. So that's right. I typically is translated as there is or there are. So you could say, hay tres flores en mi jardín. There are 3 flowers in my garden, which I guess isn't that many flowers. But if you wanted to express the fact that something exists, then you can say I, and then follow it with a plural noun like flores, or a singular noun, un hombre, a man. But this is another example of where Spanish is a little bit more impersonal than English, because English you can't just say in English, is a man eating in my kitchen, or are 3 flowers in my garden? Because if you have to have that kind of subject in the first position that's there is or there are. English kind of forces you to do that, but in Spanish you just have this one word, I, and it doesn't. You can't exactly translate it to English because it doesn't have a direct translation, but the concept is or there are. So it's a more impersonal way, just like you could say, we were talking about the expression hay que hacer cualquier cosa. Like one must do whatever thing. There's not necessarily a subject involved. It's just like an impersonal expression, a way of communicating that something exists or something needs to be done. So that's a great question.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. Don't get confused. I, along with a noun, hay 3 mesas, is something different than hay que, which is a different meaning. So, what other question we have? There are also many questions related to pronunciation, to the use of por versus para, or verbs like pensar or creer. We appreciate a lot these comments. This is going to be also useful for our next sessions. So keep commenting. We won't ignore you. We will get back to you, or we will also explain this topic in the future.
That's right. We are excited to take on your comments, and the ones we haven't addressed right now in this presentation, we will make sure to try to incorporate into future sessions, or to follow up and answer you on Facebook if we can. But we're so excited that so many people have chimed in with questions and have tuned in to watch us. I think it's great. And if you have any more questions, keep them coming after the broadcast is ended, and we'll try to follow up and address as much as possible.
Yeah.
So we're also going to post a link to a form, a Google form, that we'd love to have you fill out to offer some feedback on how we did, if this presentation was helpful, and what you'd like to see from us in the future, because we'll be back to do more of these. We'll have one at the same exact time next week, a week from now. So if you didn't get a chance to ask a question right now or have one answered, feel free to tune in next week as well, and we'll try to address those.
Yeah. Exactly. So we'll find here the link to the form that David was talking about. Please share any kind of feedback with us. We are very, very happy to read your comments, and this is going to help us also shape our next sessions. Remember that any question that you have, suggestion, topic, you have questions about, just let us know, and we will try to explain them in future sessions.
Thanks everyone for watching, and good luck studying out there. If there's any way that we can help, please reach out to our team, and stay safe and stay healthy out there. And we'll be back next week.
Yeah, was great. See you.
Bye everyone.